Okay, thanks for joining us today in what we hope to be an interesting discussion on digital identity in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, pay respect to elders both past and present. My name's Mark Waller. I'm the Managing Director of One Click Group. We run two platforms in One Click Group, One Click Verify, which is a digital identity platform, and One Click Life, which is an online tax and financial services provider with over 65,000 customers. And last year we listed on the stock exchange. I'd also like to introduce my co-director in One Click Group, Nathan Kerr, who will be speaking today, and Matt Huntington from the Department of Home Affairs. Nathan first developed a digital identity solution in the One Click Life platform to enable the product to positively identify now over 65,000 customers. His intrigue and his desire to improve the industry he's working in has seen the digital verification product separated out into its own platform for financial services. Nathan will present on the current identity verification ecosystem looks like now and his view of Utopia. We'll round out the presentation with a panel discussion at the end, where I'll be asking the experts for their views from the questions that you've submitted. So everyone these days has the option to use a digital connection rather than a physical connection. It's very apparent today, looking around the room, with 90% of attendees attending this via webinar as opposed to in person. There's no doubt that COVID has accelerated this, particularly from a work perspective, and it feels easier to work more collaboratively than it ever has done. The rapid move to digital is increasing risk based on what information we're sharing, retaining, and the digital footprint we leave behind. The business does need to know who they're dealing with, and in a lot of cases does need to positively identify their clients. The OAIC's view is that we shouldn't expect the consumer to bear this risk, but businesses should. However, Accenture believe that 88% of executives can't keep up with their changing customer demands. So if you are verifying your client's identity, are you able to manage your risk? Optus was recently subject to a cyber attack with 9.8 million Australians' personal information impacted. The OAIC made an interesting comment relating to their investigation, commenting that they will be investigating whether the information collected and retained was necessary to carry out their business. So the words collected and retained are quite important in relation to that. Medibank then closely followed the Optus cyber attack with 9.7 million Australians' data being impacted, and about 20% of Medibank's value wiped out for its shareholders. I found the OAIC's comments interesting in relation to this as well, with their talk of penalties, noting that the investigation would focus on where there were repeated interferences with the privacy contravention of the Australian privacy law, noting that they would seek up to $2.2 million for each contravention. Interesting to see with the Medibank example what the share price would have looked like with the $50 million fine rather than $2.2 million fines. RI Advice was found to have breached its licence obligations and received a $750,000 fine with a list of improvements to roll out in its business. And if you're dealing with EU citizens or conduct a business in the EU, you're also exposed to GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Last year, Amazon and WhatsApp were the beneficiaries of some large fines in relation to GDPR violations. That's for sharing information across subsidiaries. So it raises a question. Why do these companies that we deal with day in and day out, banks, phone carriers, real estate agents, settlement agents, pubs, collect and retain our identity documents? According to Commonwealth Bank's privacy policy on their website, they're required to retain some types of personal information to meet their legal obligations, including Medicare cards, passports, driver's licenses, and the lawful grounds they rely on are legal duties. So I'm interested to know, as a customer, if storing and retaining my passport and licence meets or exceeds their legal obligations, and likewise for the likes of Optus, Telstra, real estate agents, pubs, and other businesses that we deal with. Searches now cost more. So not a small change either. They've increased more than 20 times, from $2.2 million to $50 million. The Privacy Legislation Amendment Bill received royal assent on the 12th of December 2022 and may have caught a lot of financial services businesses off guard with the increase in penalties. And interestingly, the comment from Angeline Falk, Commissioner of OAIC, referencing Europe's GDPR. You might recall the size of those fines in relation to Amazon and WhatsApp earlier. So, do we need to collect and retain identity documents in our businesses? Speaking next will be Matt Huntington. Matt is the Assistant Director of ID Matching Services in the Identity and Biometrics Design and Delivery Branch ICT Division of the Technology and Major Capability Group. So I'll hand over to Matt now, his presentation. It's quite a mouthful.
Well, you didn't have to say it all. Thanks a lot, Mark. Hi, as Mark said, my name is Matt Huntington. I'm one of the Assistant Directors in the Identity Matching Services in the Department of Home Affairs. Probably two problems with that particular statement. The first is I don't really work for the Department of Home Affairs. The Identity Matching Services is a collection of services that are used to verify the various identity documents issued by governments, state, federal and territory. So I actually don't answer to the Department of Home Affairs, and I'm not going to make that public service joke that I answer to you as members of the public. I actually answer to all government, state, federal and territory. So I don't really work for Home Affairs. I work across all these governments. That's what we do. That's who we represent. I'm also not really an Assistant Director of the Identity Matching Services. My role has changed slightly over time. I'm actually probably what you describe as one of the biggest identity nerds in the department. I love identity. I love the way identity can be used, the way we can improve it, the way we can actually protect Australians more and more and more. And hopefully we can actually move Australia's identity system to something more sophisticated that protects you as an individual and you as organisations from suffering from identity fraud against your organisations. But I'm here today because Nathan saw a presentation I did at the IDMS forum about 3 months ago. We hold a biannual forum. I'm scared out of my brains because I've been asked to do it annually because it was such a success. But Nathan saw the presentation. He thought that what I presented there would be really good to actually give to you guys. And it's focusing on what we do that might enable you to collect less personal information. So I'm assuming I press. There we go. So look, that's what the main part of the presentation is going to be about, but I probably need to just start with a brief refresher. Some people here probably know what the services we run are. Many of you will be very familiar with the document verification service. Many of you will already use this. But we run a service that basically answers the question, does this document exist? Does this driver's license exist? Does this passport exist? Does this Medicare card exist? It doesn't answer the question of, is this a genuine version? It could be a fake with real details on it. It doesn't answer the question of, is the person in front of me the person who owns this document? But it does answer the question of, does this identity document exist? And it does that by running through what we call the DVS hub. I really like to walk when I present and I can't move away from the microphones. I'm feeling very hamstrung here. I want to move up to the screen and point at it. Basically, this is the DVS ecosystem. We don't collect any personal information. Everything passes through us as a hub. On the left-hand side of this picture, we have what we call our customers, our users. Now, they go through various organisations in the private sector called gateway service providers who provide you a service. This is exactly the kind of service that is being offered by OneClick here today. And it then goes out to all of these people who own the documents. We have all the state and territory birth, deaths and marriages registers for birth certificates, marriage certificates, even got death certificates now newly added. We've got driver licenses. We've got a whole pile of systems in the Department of Home Affairs with visas and IMI cards and things like that. We go to Services Australia for Medicare and Centrelink. And we go to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trades for passports. And we've recently just gone to the Australian Electoral Commission so you can confirm address information. All the kind of stuff that is presented to organisations when they're trying to verify who they are. Now, I frequently go through a video, but I was asked to only speak for 20 minutes. You build your own web interface, you build your own internal service interface, you put the details of the document through, and around about 0.9 of a second later, you'll get back a result. That result is essentially a yes, it matched. oh no, it didn't match. They're the two results. When I talk a little bit about where we're going and some of the things we're going to do that I think could transform the value of a DVS credential as far as how much faith you put into it, we also have a result called a D. Now, around 80% of the transactions that go through us come back as a yes first time. About 20% fail. Why do they fail? Not usually because the person isn't who they say they are, but because my name is Matt Huntington. No, it's Matthew. No, I want to be called Matt. I'm going to put Matt into the system when it asks me for it, but that's not the name on my driver's license. Or I misspell it. Or we have a large cohort of people who weren't born in Australia and they've anglicised their names. We actually have quite a large cohort in various communities who've changed their names, whose names has changed at various times. The consistency of names always varies. There's even a chance that it's wrong in the database that it's checking against. So there'll always be no's. And what do most people do when they get a no response? They try again. They change the name from, yeah, all right, I'm not Matt, I'm Matthew. I'm going to put my real name into the document. And it comes back eventually as a yes. But there are some documents that are never going to match. And we call that a D result. Wasn't particularly important previously. You could have just treated it as an N, but the difference between a D result and an N result is there's no point trying again. It means that document does exist, but the person might be dead. The document might be cancelled. There is a new reason why you might get a D result, which I'll be talking a little bit about later. And of course, completely irrelevant to this presentation is an S result, which means you've got a system error. Who cares about that? Not relevant for this particular conversation. So that's the DVS user experience. Many of you in the room probably have your systems using the DVS, whether you realise it or not, whenever you accept an Australian government identity credential, just to confirm that it has been genuinely issued at some stage and it is not just a complete fake. That has nothing to do with the topic of this presentation. It was just the background for it. If you run a DVS transaction, I really want to walk over to the screen. This is very hamstringing. Anyway, whenever you send a transaction through the DVS, we get a unique reference number for you. So every transaction you send to us will have a unique reference number, ABC123 or whatever you want to call it. We actually call that in our system the source VRN. That is something that everyone has to keep who does a DVS transaction. It's part of our audit and compliance responsibilities. At the back of the room, I have Steph. I said I don't actually have much to do with the day-to-day running. Hi, Steph. Steph actually looks after all the new connections, audit and compliance and things like that. So if anyone wants to chat to her separately at the end of this, she's responsible for that aspect of it. But it's always been a requirement that you keep that. Now, if you're going to put a document through, you probably need to collect biographics, document numbers, the name as it appears on the document, the date of birth, the expiry of the document. All that is the kind of stuff that verifies. What you have to collect varies from document to document, but you need to collect that information. And that's what at the moment a lot of people are collecting and keeping, taking photocopies and keeping. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is how our system may mean you don't need to keep that. You also collect the document type. You need to know whether you're verifying a West Australian driver's license or a South Australian driver's license. But once you've done that, do you need to keep it? In most cases, unless there's another obligation, the answer to that is no. I'll talk about what the other obligations might be. You're almost certainly going to be creating a custom record, so you might want to know this person. And for law enforcement purposes, it's really good to include source information. You know, if it's a web-based transaction, you know, what the locality information was from the computer it came from. If it's a in-house custom application, who was the user who entered the details on the customer's behalf? That kind of audit and accountability is important. When you use our systems, this is what we ask you to keep. We ask you to keep the unique number you gave us. We ask you to keep your version of a customer record, who you think you're dealing with. We ask you to keep the source of that. We ask you to tell us who you are. We ask you for the date and time. We don't tell you to keep anything more. But other people do tell you to keep more. They want you to keep the biographics and the document type. They want to know it was a West Australian driver's license with what number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do you have to keep that? Well, maybe, maybe not. When you give that to us, we then pass it on, as you saw in that first diagram, to the people who issue the document, and they come back and say yes or no. They never get told it came from the Commonwealth Bank, but they keep that VRN number we give them, that unique reference number we give them. They know what document it hit, and they know if it matched. And if it matched what's on the record. So they know that this was for John Smith, born on the 3rd of the 5th, 76. You might not need to keep that unless you've got a secondary use for John Smith, born on the 3rd of the 5th, 76. Now, you probably do. John Smith is probably your customer record. Born on the 3rd of the 5th, 76 might be a supplementary question you ask when they try and call you over the phone. What was your date of birth? But I've never been asked what was the driver's license number I submitted when I call the bank and they need to verify my identity. Why are we keeping that? Why are we keeping certain pieces of information that were involved in that check in the first place? So, as I said, that can be recreated. So the question I'd ask you to ask yourself is, why are you keeping that information? Is it for a legislative obligation? Is it for a policy, an internal policy? Is it because you've got secondary uses? Is it just because you're in the habit of keeping it? I suspect most people don't really understand that it can be recreated. And I'm going to tell you the circumstances in which it can be recreated, because there are circumstances it can't. But the circumstances it can are probably the ones that matter to you most. And that is where law enforcement gets involved. With a valid legislative basis, a law enforcement agency can ask you, or you can tell them, because a crime has been committed, this is the unique reference number we had. They can come to us, and they probably do about 12, 15 times a year. Actually, it's increasing in familiarity for us, saying we want the linking piece of information and we want to know who that went to. And we know that we sent it to New South Wales BDM. We know we sent that to Medicare in Services Australia, and we can give them that hub VRN. We give them that information. They can then take that, once again, with a valid legislative basis and compel the information out of that organisation, say, which record did that hit? So if that's the reason you're keeping it, so that that can be done by law enforcement, you don't need to keep it. I'm happy to say that right now. Well, not quite happy to say that. It is time consuming. So if there is an urgency requirement on it, if you've been told that there is an urgency requirement on it, that you need to be able to provide it on the spot, then this is going to take time. But if you've just been told that you need to be able to get this information needs to be retrievable, it is retrievable by doing nothing more, and I have to walk over, then keeping that. That is the sole piece of information you need to keep to get what document number you submitted, to get what name was on the document as opposed to the name you have for your customer record, to get what the date of birth of the person was. Oops, I love pointing when I talk, it's very bad. That's all you need to do. That's the capability this system gives you. Now, I'm sure you would all love me to turn around and say this meets AML CTF obligations or the Financial Services Act obligations or this or that or the other. I'm not allowed to speak for other government departments here. All I can say is that that's what it can do. So you should go back to your experts and say, hey, when you say I have to keep this, are you aware I can do this? I think that's a really important thing to say, whether that is about your legislative obligations, whether that is about your policy, whether it's about any kind of secondary use you might have, and you might have genuine secondary uses. But that's the thing you can do by simply keeping that reference number. Anyway, that's pretty much it on what Nathan asked me to come and speak to you about. He was really keen to make sure that everyone understood what was capable of happening if you did a DVS check on a document. But he did also give me an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing and where we're going. And it's already been mentioned by Mark, but obviously the Optus and Medicare data breaches has brought to a lot of attention the risks of keeping personal information and what actually occurs when a data breach occurs. We have released something called the Credential Protection Register in response to the Optus data breach. Very proud of my department. They managed to build it within 3 weeks of receiving approval to do it, which was about 1 week after the Optus data breach. What is this Credential Protection Register? Now, there is absolutely no way, shape or form those people in the room will be able to read this flowchart. But essentially, all this flowchart says is that before we give you a yes response, we'll check to see if the credential has been compromised. Has it been part of a data breach? And if it is, we're going to give a D response. Remember I talked about those responses earlier? I knew there was a reason I was waffling aimlessly. It was so that I could actually say that we're giving a D response and actually give more information about what that actually means later. And that means that we can actually block it. Now, we haven't put all the documents on from the Optus data breach on the Credential Protection Register. We put those documents on at the direction of the document issuer. I'd love to put it on at the direction of the people who own the documents, but we don't have their contact details at the moment. I would love to do that. But we did it on the direction of the document issuers, largely in the scenarios where the document issuers were saying, look, we can't organise the replacements in a timely manner. They're going to be out there and operational for a while. So we'll still let a passport be used for a passport as a travel document, but we don't want it to be used as an identity document until the individual can get it replaced. You can get it removed by going directly to the agency who issued it and they'll ask us to remove it and we'll remove it. But it's a pretty unsophisticated, pretty blunt tool at the moment. But it works. It works, and it is preventing harm right now. I can see the number of times one of these documents have been added to the register, the register have been tried to be verified. I don't know how many of them are genuine. There's no way I can know. But I know some of them are not. We've actually had some use cases where we know some are not. So that is the Credential Protection Register. It's a blunt tool, and it has got nothing to do with the future as it is. But the first thing I want to say about it is it's following my own principles. I'm not keeping a driver's license number in that protection register. I'm hashing it. Hash is just a mathematical algorithm for anyone out here who's an IT nerd. You probably know more about it than me. It's a one-way transformation. You can't reverse engineer the driver's license number from it. But every time you hash that driver's license, you'll get that number. It's a unique number that's referenced. That's all that's in our database. So if someone did steal our data, which we should all be concerned about, they're not going to get a list of driver's licenses and passports. But where are we going with this solution? This idea of hashing it and putting it in a register? Well, at the moment, we're giving a D response, which is a particularly unsophisticated response. It basically says, don't try this document. And we know that that puts at risk people of becoming what's called under credential, where they can't actually operate in the community, where they can't open a bank account. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to move it to a phase where we actually give a Y response, but it's a Y+. So I said we have a yes, but we have an additional field in our solution. Not everyone's taking it up yet, which will give additional information. So it may be yes, but be aware this was part of a data breach. Yes, but be aware it's been reported as perhaps being vulnerable for some other reason. We want to move to that. That's going to happen reasonably quickly. We just need our customers to be ready to accept a wire response because they need to know what to do with it. So we're just giving some time for that to be technically implemented. But this is what excites me. This is where I think a service like this can go a long way. It can go to the sort of stages where you are with the actual banks. Where you can turn your credit card off and on online. We really want to get to a stage where individuals can opt in to be notified when their credentials are used, to choose to say, I don't want my driver's license to be used as an identity document. It's a license to drive. To say, I don't want any of my identity documents to be used as an identity document because I know I'm not doing anything right now and I'm tech savvy enough to turn it on for the 30 seconds I need to when Members Equity or the Commonwealth Bank or this insurance agency need to verify my identity. I'll turn it on and I'll turn it back off. Give you complete control. I think that actually really revolutionises the concept of the way identities can be used in the digital space. Online, turn your identity on, do your transaction, turn it off again. No one can use my identity. I own my identity. I have real control on it. That's something we're looking to implement. We haven't actually got there yet, but we think that's a very exciting place that identity can go when it comes to the traditional forms of identity. There are, of course, DTAs, digital identity scheme and digital identity service providers and all those things, but that's one of the places we're personally trying to take the older school identities, which are used to establish your digital identities in the first place. We think that's very important. The next place we think it's very worth going is going back to this first slide I had here. So we run the document verification service. I didn't mention the others. We also run a face matching services. It includes a face verification service and a face identification service. Ignore that last one. That is not for you. That is for law enforcement in really, really, really tightly controlled circumstances where serious crime has occurred. It answers the question of who is this individual. But the face verification service you can think of as a DVS check with a photo. McDonald's, would you like fries with that? Would you like to, as well as check that the credential genuinely exists, that the face you've got matches the face that's there. That's just a massive, that's an upgrade. It's not an upgrade if all you're doing is requiring that the face be submitted, because that's just another piece of information you've got to steal off the person. But you can get that off a Facebook page very easily, or here, there, left, right, and centre. Very easy to get a photo of someone's face. But if in the future you pair that with some form of liveness detection, making sure that that face you're capturing is there in front of you, very different from uploading an image. If you're taking the image yourself and you're capturing that face, that moves identity verification from what you know about the person to something about the person, from something you have on the person to something about the person. Teamed with liveness detection, face verification is very important. Unfortunately, I can't offer that to you right now. We've got it for passports. It's been used by the ATO for their MyGov IP3 digital identities. So if you do use MyGov IDs, they have actually had a face verification service check done against the passport data. But we need some legislation to pass to collect the driver's licenses to do that for driver's licenses. And we need some legislation to pass to actually make it available to the private sector rather than to government organisations. But that's basically what we do. The same scenario I was talking about with the unique reference numbers will exist with the face verification service. I'd really like you guys to have a think about, why are the reasons I'm collecting it? Does that change when I know what I can reconstruct through a valid law enforcement purpose with a valid legislative basis for law enforcement to request that information? And to know a little bit about where we're hoping to go and how we hope that will change your risk profiles and how we hope that will protect Australians going forward. That's me. That's me done.
Thanks again, Matt. All right, so for those that aren't familiar with me, I'm Nathan Kerr, and I am the Chief Technology Officer and Executive Director of One Click Life. Being technology, it should be also tech. I get very technical. They've asked me to speak today and bring it back down so obviously everyone can sort of understand. So apologies if I am telling you how to suck eggs or something like that, but it's just a very diverse group of people that are online and also in the room. So Matt can't obviously say anything when it comes to legislation, but I can. So first one is, my lawyers go with disclaimer, and I'm going to read it for you. This presentation is intended to be for information only. While it seeks to provide practical assistance and explanation, it does not exhaust, prescribe, or limit the scope of relevant legislations and regulations. In addition, please note that the principles and examples in this presentation do not constitute legal advice, so don't sue me. Do not create additional rights or legal obligations beyond those that are contained in existing laws. Now, why I'm doing that and why I'm going through that is because I am actually going to go through and just give a quick overview of what the alphabet spaghetti and everything else out there in the market is right now. Had a meeting this morning with a large licensee, and I feel for everyone in financial services, whether it's a mortgage broker that's online or financial planner or even a bank trying to implement some of this, because we've got so much regulation and red tape that we have to get through. But I'm just going to try and touch on a few things. Just make sure everyone's on board before I get to Utopia and explain what Utopia looks like for me in the future. First thing that I want to start with, and I'm sorry again if I'm telling you how to suck eggs. The Privacy Act, all right, actually it states that pretty much 99% of everyone in this room or online actually is covered, all right, in financial services, okay? So a lot of questions that I get sometimes are people that want to tell me that they're not covered under the Privacy Act because their turnover is over 3 million. Well, that would be incorrect. All right, so everyone is obviously covered under that. So the next one I want to touch on afterwards as well is the Privacy Amendment, notifiable data breaches as well. That means that if you're compromised in the future and the data of your clients gets out there, you do have to notify first. All right. First person as well that you need to notify is the OAIC. Okay, because I had that question and everyone goes, where do I go, Nathan? And I'm like, look, I'll give you the definitive answer. you contact the OAIC first. The next one as well, I just want to dispel, dispel a myth as well for those that might not understand this. But the general data protection regulations actually reach over into Australia because of this bit here that lawyers tell me to say, due to extraterritorial effect, okay? So that's not going to stop you getting a fine if you actually breach an EU citizen, all right? Now, their fines are pretty small in comparison, obviously, to what we've set up under the legislation that got put into force in December last year. But it's 20 million euro, or 4% of global revenues. So it is something to watch out for in the future. And I think Mark highlighted as well that that's sort of basically just a minimum. And 4% can be a lot of money if you're Amazon. It's like $800 million. So that's something to be aware of. Finally as well, I just want to touch on probably where everyone is right now. So we're all doing a big review of the Privacy Act right now, and there's a lot of things there, and Matt's nodding. So we're looking at it from this point of view, is that I actually, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, is I actually think that we need to review the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Finance Act. That's where it all stems from. I think a lot of the misconception of people that retain all this information, like Matt says, and storing it for, I'm not sure what reason I had to give it to the bouncer yesterday. But, you know, they shouldn't be doing it. And the retention of documents. So this is a common one I get. So I had to go read the legislation. The retention of documents for 7 years doesn't apply to KYC. Okay? So like Matt's saying, is that you do not need to retain those copy of driver's licenses and everything else, the physical documents, okay? And that is Part 7, Section 80 to 93, okay? Because I know that there's lawyers here that are going to hang me on this very shortly. Once again, my disclaimer, this is my interpretation. So, wouldn't it be great if I could just actually tell you how, obviously, get the regulators just to tell you, you don't need to retain physical identification. I did ask the OAIC to come. I did ask AUSTRAC, and I did ask the ATO. But I'm going to let silence do the heavy lifting because this is the direct response from the ATO, and they basically blessed me to give you this information. You'll all be given a copy of the presentation afterwards. There's nothing sensitive within the information that Matt's given out or myself. So you will all have this that you can review later as well. Though AUSTRAC have been pretty clear, and the reason being is I had to ask some specifics around the document verification service, so you can read the response there. I do have the full email from them as well, and it wasn't sensitive either, so I can obviously pass it on as well. But you can also contact the specialist Industry, Education and Outreach Department in RegTech, which is what I'm governed by there as well. So you guys have got all that legislation you have to do in financial services, and I've got even more stuff that I have to go and do afterwards to provide a verification service to you. And then, my favorite is the ATO. Yes, they do not recommend retaining identification either, all right? It's just where it is. So I think where we go from there is I want to look at what a current STD looks like, all right? So when I say STD, STD stands for Storing Transmission of Data, all right? And it's a little bit funny. I just wanted to see whether I could get it into a slide. This is the current person right now in the market, okay? You give it to data brokers, you give it to real estate agents, you give it to all these people, including the 2 bouncers that I saw last night who wanted my ID as well. It's one of those things. Why are we giving you physical documents for reasons that, in my opinion as well, but I'm only doing financial services. I'm not going to get into liquor control acts and everything else, but we'll move on from that. But this is it, all right? And if we look at this now, is that one person could be 20 times in a year that you're providing your physical documentation and transmitting it to the banks or emailing it to a financial service provider. Now, what I want you to do is just take a minute and think, in the last 12 months, how many times did you give someone your personal identification details? Doesn't matter how many times I give this presentation, I still get nervous. In this, so I presented last week, similar presentation, and this presentation changes all the time. So if you've seen this presentation, you're going, hold on, Nathan said something different last week, but it changes and adapts as we go. So on average in the room, seven times in the last 12 months. All right, one person in the room was several times in the last 2 months they'd given it. They'd gone on holiday, they'd given it to Bali, the hotel, concierge to, copy and store for their, I can't obviously comment on their jurisdictions. They gave it to the travel agent. They gave it a couple of times out to pubs and clubs during obviously the Christmas party season. And, they'd also had to go and re-identify themselves with the financial institution as well, who took a photocopy out the back. And while they were moving from Optus to Telstra, that's how old I am, Telecom, to Telstra, they went out the back and photocopied it as well. That's several times this has gone into the market. So I'll just go back to this. I probably want to put just maybe a bit more of an example around this, is that it's going around everywhere, but most of these people don't actually need it. Now, what I want to sort of say and highlight through this as well is that isn't there going to be a better way? But first, before I do that, I want to look at what the losses that can occur from that system. The system's broken. So first party loss, in some cases could be ransom costs or something like that. There could be extortion if you were going to obviously extort the person online or anything like that. The cost of repairing and restoring your system or improving security. I won't name the huge data companies sort of that masquerade as an identity company, but you could Google it yourself, but it was $1.3 billion for them to fix their system after they were breached. Business interruption losses as well, because what you forget is that as a business, if I've got, this storage and transmission of data problem happening in my systems, that when, Matt's not going to come and knock on my door, but the guys in the red pajamas come and knock on my door, that's going to interrupt my business because I'm going to have to go fix it. And I've got the Australian Signals Directorate, the Australian Cyber Security Centre, and everyone else that I'd have to answer to as well. That's going to cost me a lot of money to go rectify my systems if I got hacked and data got breached from us. And as a financial service business, same thing. It's going to cost a lot of money to fix and repair. Reputational damage, I think, we're not obviously calling anyone out right now, but, I think we can see obviously the effect on, say, Medibank Private's, share price as well. Things like that happen, all right? And it might not affect your share price straight away, but I think we're just got to wait for another quarter and we'll see how many people obviously voted with their feet. And then the other thing that you've got as a business, so this is for general people, for everyone, I suppose. So I'm trying to make this quite general. Some of those might not actually matter to you on some of those points. But the other one, though, is if you are a big body corporate, you've got liabilities and negligence for failing to properly protect your client's information that you could be up for. Mark, I think, touched on that, is that, the amendment that just went through. Now, I've already spoken to a few lawyers, it's always fun, and some are interpreting that wrong. They're interpreting it as, a maximum of $50 million. No. That's your minimum target, all right, is what they can apply, all right, because there's actually two other calculations that they can do underneath it that will then increase it to be in line with, trying to keep up with AUSTRAC, I think. Obviously, they're going to see whether they can get better than $1.3 billion for a data breach. And then obviously the fines that are imposed by regulators, because there's other things as well that we forget. On my slide, it wasn't exhausted, obviously, all the regulators that we have to deal with in this industry. But, there's APRA as well that wasn't even on my thing. There's a lot of things there that are underneath there. just from an innocuous, previous slide where I showed you what the current storage and transmission of data is. All right. If you store physical identification documents and you are hacked, and you're a large body corporate, and because I haven't actually explained what the new amendment is for your smaller businesses, your trusts and everything else, but just know that it's going to cost a lot of money. So what I want to go through here is, what does Utopia look like? So Utopia to me is, you go see an advisor or a business or an institution in the future. They request for identification so they can provide a product under anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism finance or whatever other reason why we want to do it. They then go to a verification service. Verification service then goes to the Department of Home Affairs. Matt's already done my presentation on what a VRN is and how we work in the system and everything else. Though that then gets passed back. What we do then is obviously get express consent once again from the client to transfer the data or the VRN. So the client is aware of where their information is going until Matt obviously gives me the service so I can actually do notify and control. And then everyone's going to have obviously control over their IDs, which is going to be amazing in the future. But that is what I think Utopia is. Now, if we look at what the storage and transmission of data in Utopia is, well, it's actually quite simple. And in the future, I believe that was one thing that I probably forgot to touch on, is under the consumer data rights, all right, we all own our ID, not the institutions, no one should have my identity, all right, except for me, all right? And I should always be able to access and know where my information's going, which is where phase 3 is for the Department of Home Affairs, and phase 3 of my product will be moving as well. So in that, if there was a data breach, and let's just imagine Optus, well, Matt's given this sort of technical stuff, so I didn't really need to get into it. They come and hack my system. So let's just go, they come and hack me. They are not going to get anything besides a name and an email address, which is everything that I can find on the internet anyway. I don't even need to move into the dark web. I don't even need to get into the deep web, all right? I can find all that on public facing. So if it was to be, for example, a large telecommunications company in the future and they got hacked and they were using a verification service, all right, and there are other verification services out there, I'm only giving an agnostic view, is they wouldn't have anything besides a virtual reference number, and I can see obviously aliens here as well, but they'd have a virtual reference number and they would then be able to do nothing. Simple. That's it. Virtual reference number. I don't know, Matt, if I gave you a virtual reference number, are you going to tell me who it is?
Not unless you're a police officer.
Correct. I am not law enforcement, so I will not hold this data. So, where to from here? Future's not written. I think we need to transition over the next 3 years. All 4, I know what it's like working in large banking organizations which struggle to obviously sometimes adapt and all this. It does take time. We have to find where we've gone and put all this data. All right, but if we made it now where we drew a line in the sand and started moving towards this, so the next time a client needs to re-verify, use a verification service. All right, don't hold or retain that data in the future. Start practicing those hygienes and transition across into Utopia. So if there is ever a breach, and again, the only person that knows your document ID numbers is the government. It shouldn't even be a verification service. All right. Though saying that, there are other people in the room that I'm working with and transitioning across, is I understand that you have to transition. So I think you need to go and find a verification company that can help you transition. Work with your technology to move towards Utopia. All right. I appreciate everyone's time. I'm sorry I usually get on a soapbox on this one and just have a big rant. If you have a drink with me later, you'll hear me rant. If you got here early, you would have heard Matt and I ranting. So I'm always happy to obviously have a discussion. And yeah, you can always email me or reach out on LinkedIn and have a discussion. And I'm very passionate about this, like Matt is as well, I want to see this fixed in the future. Prevention's always better than cure. That's what they say for real STDs. As I said, I'll be providing the presentation to you. I am an absolute nerd, so I know all the legislation, unfortunately. But I've just given a few places for people that are online afterwards. You can go have a look at it, click on the links and start mucking around with it yourself. That concludes the formal part of the presentations. And I believe, Mark, you've got some questions for us in the panel.
Yeah, so we'll jump into a panel discussion now, and thanks to everyone that has submitted questions. So first one, Matt, looks like it might be one for you. But how long has VRN been around, and why is it not widely adopted?
Well, that's an interesting question, because VRN was there on the very first day we did the very first DVS transaction. And it was required to be kept by all of our customers from the very first transaction that existed. I honestly think that what's happened is that people don't understand what they are collecting when they collect the VRN, what it potentially means. As I said in my presentation, I'm not going to say you don't have to collect these things. There's valid secondary uses for all this information. I mean, someone's name is going to be part of your customer record and it's on the document. So yes, you can keep that from the document. But unless there is a legislated obligation to keep that information, especially things like the driver's license number, your passport number, those secondary things that I find implausible that you'd have a real secondary use for, then I brought your statement earlier that I'm not providing legal advice.
Yeah.
I just pretend I said Nathan's disclaimer. I can't see why you keep it. I really can't. I don't know why you keep that information. Disclaimer in place.
Excellent, thanks. Peter, welcome to the panel discussion. Peter's a self-licensed advisor and has agreed to jump on. He was an early adopter of the One-Click Verify product. And Peter, a question to you from myself is, you were an early adopter of the product. Firstly, why did you want to move to a digital identification product?
Yeah, well, thanks for the reminder on the fines, Nathan. In private practice, we simply don't need that risk. That's pretty much as simple as it is. We don't need that risk. We don't need to hold sensitive data in our systems. We don't want to be the reason at the point into the client transaction that our client data has been taken and we're the root cause of that. So no, just don't need the risk.
And thanks for that. And obviously, it's a big change in your business from, as I understand what you were doing, which was photocopying, scanning, emailing, identification. Two questions to come out of that. Firstly, how are you removing all that data off your system, for one? And secondly, what's the client response been to that change?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were in an evolving process to rid our system of sensitive data. But on the photocopying one, that's industry-wide. As practitioners, we need to raise the bar in the AML KYC space, and the verification product certainly is a step in the right direction from our point of view. Client response has been great, really. For those of you who may not have heard, Optus, Medibank, Harcourts, there were some breaches there, so it was quite, the clients were appreciative of what we're doing to protect their data. It is their data, it is their sensitive data, and we're respecting that.
And Nathan, one of the questions is collecting and retaining identity documents an insurable risk?
Yeah, I believe it is an insurable risk. We've got insurance as well. It's just how much insurance you're going to get and what your premium is going to be in the future. Good luck, obviously, speaking to the underwriter if you're an Australian company now, trying to get obviously adequate levels of cover in place, because I'm pretty sure they'd be scared of obviously reinsuring that now.
And probably one for you again, actually. Given that you've spoken about the legislation and the fines, $50 million fines. So I'm a one-person advisor business with my own AFSL. My turnover is only 600 grand per annum. Is it illegal for me to retain IDs?
It's not illegal to retain IDs. I think it's just that I think from the panel that you have here today, from all different areas, so verification, government, and then private practice, is I think you all agreed, after what I've said recently, that you shouldn't do it. It's not that it's illegal.
And the second,
Look, I've got to be very careful. I'm an employee of the Department of Home Affairs, or as I said earlier, of every single state, territory and federal government who issues identity documents is probably more accurate. I cannot speak on behalf of the Attorney General's Department on the Privacy Act, but I can say we do an awful lot of work in there, and there is a provision of reasonable necessity. It must be reasonably necessary to collect any kind of personal information, especially personally sensitive information. So I suppose the question becomes is, can you defend that it's reasonably necessary? And I think in a lot of places where you're not bound by a legislative obligation to collect it for other reasons, that I think it's becoming harder and harder to justify that you've done that.
I think that's a
consent for the collection as well, whatever use you're using it for. So, if you're collecting it for marketing purposes, you'd better be saying you're collecting it for marketing purposes. And frankly, I have concerns when it's buried in a 37-page product disclosure. We have 2,600 users of the DVS. We do 120 million transactions a year, and we frequently get this question, not just from people like Nathan, but from all of our customers. What are my obligations? And we say, look, we can't advise you, but you need to be very careful in this particular space. It hasn't been tested in law. What is reasonable when it comes to consent? What is informed consent is a very, very difficult position legally. What is a reasonable necessity to collect this information is very difficult to define. And if you can get rid of it, I'd personally advise that you take the safest path and get rid of it.
And I guess that's part of OAIC's investigation into Optus is should they be collecting and retaining information or those documents for running their business?
I'm not going to say exactly where that's at.
The second part to the question I asked before about the whether it's legal to retain IDs is if I did get hacked, given the small size of my business, would I be liable for any fines?
Look, depending on the business, assuming financial services, which 99% are covered under the Privacy Act, the answer is it's just then is determined whether you're a body corporate or not, and how big your fine's going to be, and what information was coming out of there. Most financial services businesses, unfortunately, have way too much data and don't even know where to go find it, so we can even delete it. So chances are it could be quite a hefty fine as well, and probably more than what RI advice was. So did that answer the question, or did I just waffle?
No, I think that's good. A bit of both. So we know that obviously data breaches are real, and ASIC noted in the RI advice data breach that they are inevitable. So there was a point that they made in their synopsis, is that they are inevitable. So how do we avoid the impact of those data breaches in the future? I think we may be replicating a little bit.
I think this is just a broken record. Don't have it.
Yeah.
Don't have it. If you don't have to, don't have it. I can't give better advice than that, and I think Nathan would like to get on his soapbox again, so I'm going to hand the mic back.
Yeah, no, I gave it to him because he says it best. So.
Yep, comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Excellent. Does one of the questions that's come through? So, in using a VRN, and question for you, Matt, does this satisfy legislative requirements regarding identity verification?
Well, that is very, very difficult for me to say because there's a variety of different legislation and I can't speak on behalf of all those organisations that are responsible for it. All I can do is provide the advice as to what can be reconstructed, which is where I think the missing piece of the puzzle is. A lot of people don't understand what can be reconstructed without keeping that information. So when it needs to be recalled, can it be recalled? And I think I said this in my presentation, there's just a few limitations to when it can be recalled. The first is if there is a need where it doesn't have a valid legislative basis that can require it to be compelled, which is generally speaking the Crimes Act. So if it's not a criminal offence, the police don't want to get involved in it, but yet you're still going to be asked to do these things, well then it's very unlikely you're going to be able to reconstruct the information. The other one, which I know I mentioned in my talk, was the timeliness, the speed at which you might need to reconstruct that. But I'm not in a position, I am not a lawyer, I have not reviewed the acts, and I am not authorised to speak on various government departments. I do believe it's something that we actually need to be working on as a government. I think we need to be clearer and more concise about that. And I do know that there are steps in progress, but I'm not authorised to speak where they're heading and exactly what advice is coming out there.
And last question, we're just running out of time, was how long, so assuming I've decided in my business that I want to move from collecting and retaining those identity documents, how long realistically would it take, and probably a question for you, Nathan, to transition from that in my business, in your experience, to using a VRN service?
Look, it depends on the company. So, one of the larger licensees that I spoke to this morning, it's going to take us a while to obviously transition, and realistically, if we can get it done in 4 years, we'll be doing well. But it can be done that quickly. I think, Pete, you'd be probably in about 4 years, you'd be totally weaned off, and everyone else will be going through re-verification through. Yep.
I'd like to think in 4 months we're weaned. But as practitioners, I mean, we're at as I said, the pointy end of the client relationship, and we're also led by financial institutions. I mean, I shudder when I hear, in the office, an institution say, we need some proof of ID, can you email it through? And it still is out there and it's still happening. I'd hope, the sooner the better. The sooner the instos can get on that train, it certainly helps us as practitioners raise the bar, raise the standard, and get to that space.
Excellent. Thanks very much, guys, and thanks very much everyone for attending, whether you're online or in person.